Are live. We are live on Unblocked Live. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn, and this is my guest today. You know him as Villain Report. He is a live streamer, and we've seen him around over the last year. He's been very active at protest actions. And
Jeremy, going
uh,
robot again.
what's that?
Your mic and your image is going glitchy again.
Really? Damn, it looks beautiful to me. Really? Even still? Technical difficulties.
All right, there
Um,
you're
I'm
you're good
back.
now. Yeah,
I'm good. We're
yeah.
good.
Maybe it's intermittent signal.
Yeah, geez, I don't know how. Router's right here, but the best laid plans. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. Villain Report is here, and this is Unblocked Live. We're going to be talking WiSpa today. We didn't know it, but each of us planned to be there on July the 17th in front of the WiSpa in Los Angeles, California, where two groups collided. We were caught in the middle, on both sides, back and forth. We have the real story. This is Unblocked Live. My guest today is Villain Report. Villain, you came on down. You're not local to LA. What made you decide that this was an event to come cover for your live stream?
Well, I've been filming political unrest events a lot this last year, Antifa or like political conservative rallies that kind of get rowdy sometimes. But um, I was personally interested in the story about the clash between women's rights to privacy and trans women's rights to live and let live. And there sometimes those two things don't seem to be possible to happen at the same time. So thought it'd be interesting to come see.
Did you expect the crowd to be adversarial? It seems that at times you're somebody that I have observed your work over the last year. You go and you talk to people and you understand that it's your right to be there and you're rather unapologetic about it. How were you confronted by the crowd on Saturday in front of the WeSpa?
Well, it was I knew it was going to be an Antifa event, and that there was also going to be a right wing crowd there protesting each other. And so when Antifa comes out and block for those big events, they typically don't like anybody that they don't know, especially if that person has a camera. So I expected to have to keep high awareness and protect myself in case things went south. Um, I've also learned over the last year that when you go to these events, the right wing crowd can get into mob think too, and they can be just as dangerous. And so, because I don't, I'm definitely not Antifa. I'm center politically, a little bit leaning right, but I have views that are would be probably considered far left on some things. But so I do love the fact that I get to live in America and that I was born here. I like to say that I'm patriotic in the sense that I'm thankful for my country and I'd like to help keep it safe and just a good place to live. But I don't really like taking the term patriot because that has such a political and social meaning today. Like it's usually when that's used, it's people taking that on as an identity and a membership in a specific group. And while I might not have qualms with those groups at times, it's just not really my identity. I do love my country. I'm thankful to be an American, but um, I've seen too many of these patriot events where the patriots get into mob think that's very similar to how Antifa gets into mob thinks at riots.
And you also hoist the black flag, as it were, and you get into a conversation in the clip that I'm about to play. The first individual that's shining a flashlight in your face in front of the WeSpa. He is in full black block. We've been come to know there's chatter that his name is Chad. We'll just call him Black Block Chad right now. He comes up to you with a flashlight and he's waving it in your face, and then you start talking about anarchism. What was that conversation like, and how did that precipitate a longer conversation that I'm going to show people if you're just tuning in? I did not know that Villain Report was going to be there. We have met previously in Washington, D.C. before and been friendly and had discussions. And you had done an audio podcast with me at one point. So we're very familiar with each other, but we did not know each other was going to be in that crowd. So at one point, I walk up right next to him while he's having a conversation with the person that confronts you. The person that confronts you is trying to get you out. He's flashing the flashlight. 15 minutes later, he comes back and he wants to have a conversation with you. Before that, though, you were talking about anarchism. Can you explain to me the dynamic for those of us that might be a little confused? Because here you have a far left black bloc anarchist that is Antifa aligned, and you're able to have a conversation with that person as a right-leaning live streamer. Why is that? And how does anarchism and the common language there play?
Well, the people that allow me to talk to them on both sides are always individuals. I'm always looking for individuals to talk to. A lot of my streams, I will explain to people that I look for the man on the street, and I want to understand people and their individual point of views. So if I'm talking to a member of Antifa or a member of a right-wing protest, I'm trying to talk to individuals. They're not representatives of those groups. And I think part of the reason why I'm able to talk to people sometimes is because I treat them individually and I'm personally interested in what they're saying. I give them a chance to talk, but also I'm honest about my views, and I put those up front. And I believe I'm not quite sure. I don't remember the word for word interaction when the black bloc guy came up and started putting a flashlight in my face, but I think I started suggesting he was acting fascist and not respecting my rights. And then I'm not sure how it went, but I think he made an accusation towards me, and then I explained that I'm an anarchist. I would describe myself as a idealist anarchist, because I don't believe anarchy works. But the reason why I resonate with anarchy is because I don't believe in the idea of involuntary authority. If I haven't willingly interact with somebody and made an agreement with them and maybe chose them as an elected leader or an elected official, I don't believe that anybody has the right to tell me what to do, or that I have the right to tell them what to do. Unless we are trampling on each other's freedoms and rights, then you have the right to self-defense. But I just don't believe in the idea of authority unless it's voluntary. So
When it comes to coercive authority, I think the folks that we see out there that have the authority, whether it's Twitter clout, you have these influencer accounts that are Antifa aligned that are rather authoritarian in the way that they go after people, whether it's trying to get them deplatformed, to get them to lose their jobs because they believe they're quote unquote chuds or aligned as their political adversaries. What I see in this iteration of anarchism, which back in the 2000s, in 2010s, they talked about insurrectionary anarchism. That was the term that was used. Crime Think spoke a lot about that. But when it comes to coercive authority, these Antifa groups and the way that they hold court of their street corner and whether you're allowed to film, it is the epitome of coercive authority in the sense that you are stopped and you have an umbrella stuck in your face, a flashlight waved at you, and you're told you are not to film unless you are them. And what you have done so well, and what has kind of inspired me about your work, is you've taken that on, and I've seen you do this many times. I'm going to play a clip right now of you. This is you in front of the WiSpa at around 10:40 or 10:30 or so a.m. This last Saturday, July the 17th, 2021. And we'll talk a little about what the WiSpa controversy is after this, a little bit more about your identity and why you choose to shield it and the current climate when we go to these things. Let's look at this clip really quick.
Why do you call yourself an anti-fascist if you're acting like a fascist?
Fascists have
Only rights for you, but not rights for other people.
Is that right?
Yes, that's how you're acting right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you feel that your actions are moral and courageous right now, why are you trying to prevent me from doing my freedom.
Do you know this guy's name?
You know, I think there's just a big mistrust of media and anybody who's filming, especially if we're not close or know them. So it's just a precaution.
Okay.
It's literally not personal. It's just because you have a camera and you're filming. So if you're actually
It's actually not bothering me. I've got my sunglasses on, and it's not messing up the camera like you think it is.
If you're here for trans people, you wouldn't pay attention to it and you would keep your phone on the police.
I'm here for the rights of everybody.
If you're not here for trans people,
We actually know who you are, though. That's the problem.
That's cool.
Yeah,
Fine.
So, like, we don't believe you because we
it's
know.
not.
That's cool.
So this
You're
is
here to
it.
make
Hold
riot
on.
porn
Let me
footage.
talk.
No,
Yeah.
I actually am not. And if you know anything about my account, you know I've spoken about that a lot, and that's why I don't put out a lot of that stuff anymore. Because I don't like the people that are just getting off on watching this stuff. I am actually an idealistic anarchist. I don't believe anarchy works because it creates a power vacuum and it makes little mafia style like people take power. But I don't believe in the idea of authority. I don't believe people have the right to tell each other what to do.
So anarchy, by my definition, is community working together without the control of the government.
You can make up definitions. Anarchy means no government.
Yes.
It's no archy.
Exactly. It's the communities having control over themselves.
It doesn't
with
work.
No hierarchy.
It's a very ideal thing, but it does not work.
I am half indigenous, and the indigenous people before colonizers got here, your white ancestors, were doing it for thousands of years. 12,000 years.
Why are you assuming my heritage? I have Cherokee heritage.
So that last moment is kind of interesting as far as how the way the conversation just comes to a halt there. You know, it's interesting because you could see the group mentality going on. The guy who comes up next to him, the sort of heavyset guy, I believe that's Left Coast Right Watch account. He's one of the Antifa line press. Obviously, they're having this very familiar conversation. The woman is sort of spouting the party line and taking you through all of these sort of gymnastic steps of what you're supposed to, how you're supposed to conform. And ultimately, the guy in the black box will return and speak to you as just an individual when they're in this individuating sort of situation of group think, and they're trying to impose it on you. I mean, this isn't a first for you. You've seen this a lot. What were you thinking in that moment?
When he came back up to me?
Yeah. Were you surprised when he comes back?
I didn't know what to think at first. I thought that he was coming to distract me for something. But then really quickly, it seemed clear that he was genuinely trying to have an honest conversation with me. And so I didn't put the camera on him at that point because I found the conversation valuable, and I felt like it would end if I filmed him while I was talking to him. But I think we had a really good conversation.
Yeah, and what he probably doesn't know, or maybe he did know, is I'm standing kind of out of view there, and so I turn my camera on to you guys every once in a while, but I'm listening. So I'll show you a clip. This is just a little setup clip of him at the beginning, and then there's a little clip I posted to Twitter of the same fellow, and then him coming back 15 minutes later to talk to you. And that conversation actually does go on to be more about anarchism and authority and so forth. And I think he was intrigued enough. Obviously he was, because he comes back.
Not bothering me. I've got my sunglasses on, and it's not messing up the camera like you think it is.
If you're here for trans people, you wouldn't pay attention to it and you would keep your phone on the police.
I'm here for the rights of everybody.
So he returns.
Captain Deplorable sends Muhuhaha $20 donation.
What do you think about this whole thing? Are you live?
Yeah, I'm live.
What do you think about the whole trying to brand queer people as pedophiles thing? It's kind of played out.
I
right?
think that's not right. Like nobody knows who the person was in there, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Let me ask you a question. So in the male locker room, almost nobody walks around naked. Usually, they usually cover up. They get undressed, but you don't just walk around. And there's always that old guy.
Oh wait, sorry, wrong clip. It's this one.
Locker room. They don't just walk around flaunting.
Oh, Korean spas are different. So Korean spas are like everyone pretty much walks around naked because like the spas have like the treatments are all nude. traditionally people are nude. The saunas are nude and all that stuff, right? And so it's like people are pretty much naked in there. And that's just like that's a very Korean spa kind of thing.
My
But the
thing is
most trans women that I know would be like, if I were preoperative and I still had male like a penis, I wouldn't be wanting it in a place.
that's what my point was. They were
Every
kind of
trans person I
being
know says that.
provocative.
Yeah, but I mean, if it even happened.
And so people are different. There are certain things that are going to happen. There are people that see the world through the transgender understanding. They feel they're transgender, they identify, and they live their life a certain way. They're not hurting people. But then there's also women that a lot of women are very uncomfortable with male genitalia in the female locker room, and that's their space where they feel like they can be vulnerable. And so like both sides are just like attacking the other side and not trying to actually decide how are we going to respect all people and
Yeah, I mean, I still don't think it happened. Like,
what you look at the video, it's not just the black woman that came out yelling, but there's another woman in there in her bathrobe. She like left the locker room in her bathrobe, and I think there were a couple other women in there. So
I just know that like every brand of queer person since queer was a thing has been labeled a pedophile. There's still people who think gay couples should not be able to adopt because they're pedophiles, right? So I frame it in a larger context and say, look, I don't know if it happened or not. All I know is the alt-right's obsessed with pedophilia. Pizzagate happened, right? They thought that there was a pedophile ring in a fucking pizza parlor in Connecticut. Dude shot it up, right? So I think it's dangerous rhetoric, and I think it's old. I think it's an old, played-out trope that queer people are going to be associated with pedophilia to demonize them, right? And so part of my opinion in the alt-right is as long as you hate the right people, you can be a part of this. And I see this as an attempt to paint trans people, which is trans is the new out group that has to be hated, right? And so I think that people are.
I think both factions of society are wrong.
And you go on to say both extremes are wrong. And there's more of that clip. I just got to work on it and subtitle it. But these are the kind of conversations that we don't get to see because everybody is so stuck in their tribe and in their mindset that we don't even have. I covered this for 2 days, and this is the only conversation that I saw that actually discussed what happened. And he's repeating, before we talked about. I just mentioned, you said that the question you might have is that mindset that he didn't think it was real. Well, that comes from the press. The press got a story out very quick that was by an anonymous writer using unnamed sources from the police, saying that police suspected that the account wasn't correct, that there was never a transgender person, which might be true. It might have been a man who didn't identify as trans at all. That got out by a publication called The Blade. It was picked up by Slate, which in their headline said, could be a hoax. That went all around the internet. And the next thing you know, they're ginning up support by saying this is all a right-wing hoax to make trans people look bad. And so that's how that misinformation got around. Now, I called the LAPD and I spoke with them. They told me that the story from The Blade came out on July the 7th. LAPD told me an actual police report wasn't filed until the evening of July 6th. So one evening is not enough time for the police department to make up their mind that something may or may not be a hoax. Police department says, I don't know where they got that information. We can't control misinformation, but they didn't get it from this office because there was never a police report for them to go off of. So that's a little bit of background there.
Correct. You said the police report was made July 6th?
Yep. 2 weeks after the incident, which was June the 23rd.
So this was after the first street encounter.
Yes, the first street encounter or riot, I think it's fair to say, was on July the 3rd. So it was actually filed on the second business day because it was the 4th of July holiday over that weekend. And it was filed on the Tuesday after, which would have been July 6th, July 7th, the Wednesday after, right? The very next day, this article comes out saying that police suspect it's a hoax. But again, the problem with this article is that there are activists that were involved with the article. The the picture used for the article belongs to Vishal, who everybody knows is LA's sort of number one Antifa-aligned activist. And the piece itself is written by an anonymous writer quoting anonymous sources. So,
do you know details about the police report? Who did the original woman make the police report?
Yes, she made the police report. Reportedly, according to her attorney, he tells me that one other corroborating witness was also there. He said he saw this other woman in person file a report too. And you mentioned in the video, he keeps saying, "Oh, it's fake," and then by the end, he kind of almost says, "Oh, I don't know if it is or not." But this is why we're out here, kind of thing. But I think it does matter. I think it does matter that she is a legitimately. She's not connected with the protests. She's not a perennial right-wing Trump supporter. And I'll show you guys her Instagram as well. But she is the one, they call her Angel because her screen name was called Cubana Angel. And it's a reference, I believe, to her Afro-Latina heritage. Her Instagram is mostly some Bible verses, some religious axioms. But as I said, she waited 2 weeks, and according to her attorney, she was never politically active, and she wasn't involved with the organization of any of these protests. Somebody just commented, I think that Angel lawyered up. That's true. She got a lawyer. I don't know what their arrangement is. It might be a pro bono kind of thing. He's somebody that is decided to file the suit because what they want to do is challenge California's laws so they protect public spaces for women and children. So she did get a lawyer, and they also filed a complaint in regards to death threats that she said she got after she went public with that video. Your thoughts on the video and this conversation with Black Bloc Chad, as we're calling him?
Are you referring to the clip we just watched or the video of the woman?
Yeah, in other words, your impressions of the video and how they were different than the Black Bloc fellow you were talking to.
Yeah, my impression of the videos looked like a woman that was very, very angry about the event. There's also the woman in the background of the video in the bathrobe. She came out of the locker room partially dressed. She didn't take time to get dressed. She looked very upset, like emotionally upset. But that sounds ludicrous to me that it was like some big organic hoax that happened. It sounds Looney Tunes to me.
I hate to say it, it's a conspiracy theory, and the left is always, dragging the right for being conspiracy theorists, but this is a conspiracy theory. Go on.
Yeah, a lot of people in the crowd were pushing that. In my stream, there was many people that were just yelling at me that it was foolish that I even believed it happened because it was obviously not true. And I'm like, I had an argument with some women there in Block and one in not Block, and they were telling me it didn't happen. There's no evidence. I said there is evidence. That the women that complained in the video, and they said, well, there's no trans person has come forth to talk about it. And so that just did away with it for them. There's no reason for them to take it seriously.
Now, this is her Instagram page. For a second, I showed she had posted an Ahmaud Arbery meme, and she had posted a meme about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. It's sort of your sort of typical social justice, racially divisive meme. And she also posted, this was in, it says here, May 7th, 2020, she posted Justice for Ahmaud Arbery. So it's interesting because as I researched her profile, she didn't start doing a lot of these on-camera videos until after. That's the WiSpa video right there. You can see it has 184,000 views. It's not just her video, though, that was picked up. A political account called Legxit, Latino Exit, about Latinos exiting the Democratic Party. They ripped it 3 days later, and they posted it. And that's how then Tucker Carlson and the whole right-wing sort of media machine got a hold of it. But this is her original video posted June 24th, which is 1 day after the event. As you pointed out in your discussion, there are other people. Now, this guy kind of comes and gives like a social justice explanation about why she should chill or so forth. But you see other women in their robe right there to the left. And another woman talks at one point, And so she's not alone. Some people are hiding their faces and so forth. And there's the WiSpa employee explaining, saying that we cannot discriminate based on identification. And she says, but that's a man. Now, it's not clear if the person ever identified themselves as a trans person. It could have been a man who identifies as a man, or as they say in the colleges or whatever, a cis man, cisgender, or whatever. This was somebody, it could have been just a straight up man. And that's how she describes the person, as biologically presenting male anatomy. And the lawyer told me this. The lawyer told me that in their interaction, I asked, is there anything that was said? Did this person ever identify themselves as a trans individual? And the lawyer said the only thing that this person said when confronted by Angel was, stop harassing me. That's all the person said. They didn't identify themselves as trans as far as we know. So just some more information and some more clues as to how quickly a story can be taken from somebody, can be manipulated, and the social media machine and the online machine concocts this alternative narrative that people in the streets actually believe. That's what's so fascinating.
Yeah. Have you looked into the California laws that the staff is mentioning? Is there any that requires other than a verbal identification, or can a grown man with no, like, can a 6'8" hairy football player go into the women's locker room if he simply says, I'm a woman? Or
Basically, because the law is written so vaguely, it does not mention anything as far as outward shows or what people are presenting. It just means that you cannot discriminate as far as gender in public spaces and gender identification. So because it's written in such a loose way, this is what she wants to challenge, that people presenting the same anatomy. You think of, if we're not allowed to say men and women anymore, according to this sort of new theory of gender and sex theory or whatever, well, what are we going to put on the doors? Just the actual, like, penis and an actual, is that how we want? Because ultimately, what women traditionally, in Korean spas, this is what's interesting. Korean and Japanese spas are similar. In Japan, they're called onsen. And I went to one when I was a kid, and you're walking around but the point is, you're there with people of the same genitalia. You're not thinking about trans, or you're not thinking about man, women, or gender theory. You're just thinking about being around people of the same, as a child, because I went in as like a teenager. You're just thinking, oh, I'm in a place with a bunch of other people who look like my dad down there. And there is a certain convention and tradition to that in these Japanese and Korean saunas, spas. So if we want to talk about, cultural, tradition or cultural appropriation even, or spin the argument around, the question is, can't we just have a conversation? Can't we just have a conversation about what women and what children might prefer in this situation, instead of it turning it into a whole militant sort of condemnation of if you're not with us, then you're against us.
Yeah. It seems like both sides is taking an extreme point of view at the event, at least, and in the media. And I see it nuanced. I think the situation leans more one way than other for two reasons: numbers, and also there is a sense of like, it's not good to be unjust towards the minority, or the extreme minority in this situation, but at the same time, we can't let the extreme minority's preferences trample the great majority's preferences. So there are, in a woman's locker room, the vast majority are going to be biological women. In society, it is a extremely small faction of people that are biological males that choose to live as women. And so when the exception to the rule, or the outlier, tries to go into a private space like that, and then I just don't see how that Antifa crowd was so slow to acknowledge the desires for comfort vulnerability, privacy, and feelings of safety of women and girls. And there are vastly more women and girls that are going to feel that way than there are going to be trans people that are going to feel left out if they can't go in that space. And I'm not saying that just because the majority rules, but I'm saying there's a great loss of well-being in this equation. But at the same time, society's not dealing with this. Like, I, I don't want to push my views on people and make people live the way I think is healthy and best. But at the same time, like, I'm at a loss for words. It's a confusing idea for me. But these trans people, like, many of them are just trying to live their lives, and they have a certain condition, and they're trying to be happy. And a lot of these people suffer very, very deeply and have a lot of pain that they go through, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And then you get down to the question, like, well, what if they wanted to go to the spa? Where do they go? Do we have to create a third bathroom set in certain areas? Do we, like, I don't know how we handle that, but no side seems to be trying to respect both positions, the safety and comfort of women and the dignity of people that choose to live as outsiders or choose to live their lives in a rare pattern.
Well, you talked about, third spaces. What's kind of interesting, and those who have watched my previous podcast, I interviewed Jairo, spelled Jairo. They call him Gyro on the right wing during the march because not the Spanish pronunciation. But he's a young Hispanic kid, mid-20s, gay, identified at one time as queer. Was at the LGBT house. He aged out, he told me. At 25, he couldn't stay at the youth center anymore, the LGBT youth center in Hollywood. So Trans Latina Coalition took him in, and it was a trans activist house. And he left that house. He stayed in the trans community. He was in recovery at one point. This is the conservative organizer that was beaten on July the 3rd. The person that, if folks remember, there was a video of him curled up on the sidewalk and they're beating and kicking him. About 5 guys are. Now, he aggressed. They took his signs. He went and got pepper spray, walked up to a guy with brandishing the pepper spray. The guy swings at him. And then pretty soon he's got 5 guys on them, and they're all beating on him. But his story is interesting in the sense that when he was on the bullhorn, he was saying, this is not about transphobia. I have trans friends. I even went to lived in transgender housing, he said. And they're all booing him and heckling him and saying, yeah, sure. But I looked it up and I researched it, and I spoke to the head of Trans Latina, and it was interesting. She was a very militant activist, in the sense that when I told her about the Black Bloc beating up the evangelicals, she even said yes, like she was giving me a couple of yeses. And I was like, what? Like I think she expected that I'd be somehow on this team of, yeah, we're dishing it out to the religious right, but I'm not on. I've seen too much violence, and so I'm not on anybody's team of violence. There's a woman who was an organizer with SoCal Antifa named Jamie Penn. She is a trans woman who's on the Koreatown Neighborhood Council. She's the first one on July 3rd to steal Jairo's sign and rip it up. It was a stupid sign. It said WiSpa. She takes it, she rips it up. The next sign that's taken by the Black Bloc guy says, trans activism erases women's rights. That's taken from Jairo, and that's the one that he comes back with pepper spray, then he gets beat up. But the big sort of reveal here is that he lived in trans housing under the name Sarah for months, all the way up until this year. And he said that it was a confusing time because he was... the activists were pushing him, to hormones and all these other things that he wasn't sure about. And he ended up rebelling and gravitating towards conservatism, which is just interesting. So there he is on July 3rd, having lived in Trans Latina, and he got triggered by a couple of other things. And just, I think personal drama is a fair enough label to use, but there he is getting beaten as someone who is advocating for third spaces. Now, I also had another guest on this podcast just the other week, Erin Smith. She is a conservative GOP candidate who's a trans woman. and she talked about something very similar to what Black Bloc Chad in your conversation said. He said anybody who is preoperative trans doesn't, usually want to make some sort of big show like that, and that they're constantly reading social cues. And Aaron Smith's comments to me was that if someone's transitioning, it's not like, okay, just jump into the other bathroom now, but it's a process of reading social cues. And her quote was, one day, maybe it's you walk into a bathroom and somebody looks at you like, and it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm reading as a woman now. And that it's a more sort of nuanced and thoughtful process. So the idea that somebody was flaunting in this instance, and making people unsafe, that should be something that we can have a conversation. And I'm just amazed that you were able to have that conversation with him, as limited and short as it was. I think it's important because these are young kids who are sort of fanaticized in college and graduate school, from what I can tell. A lot of them are overeducated, in the sense that they come out very, very, very smart about how messed up this country supposedly is compared to the rest of the world, and try to litigate the past and by persecuting everybody in the present. And it's sort of a shock to see this. When did you first come into contact with Antifa-like groups? This SoCal Antifa account only popped up 2 months ago. It very quickly looked like it wanted to make an impression. I saw a lot of unilateral beatings of conservatives on July the 3rd. What we saw on July the 17th was more akin to, I think, what we saw in Washington, D.C. on December the 12th, which was both sides really going at it and showing up for combat to some extent. And then, of course, you ended up getting maced, of all places, on the right wing side.
Yeah. The first I came acquainted with Antifa was, I'm from the Portland, Oregon area, and probably before Trump's election in 2015, you started seeing like these groups of Black Bloc people like doing, just being unruly downtown, and then slowly you see a little bit more of it, and they'd have little mini riots or actions in the middle of a Saturday, and I never really thought about it much. Like, I saw it, and it was something I saw on social media every once in a while, and I kind of thought it was annoying that people were acting like that. And then when George Floyd riot happened in Minneapolis, I kind of felt like we were definitely going to have riots in Portland, just because that's Portland's thing. And there were some marches going on, and I went to a couple of those to see for myself. I remember I went to a couple speeches by Portland City Council member Joanne Hardesty, and I was awestruck listening to her speak, because to me, it's like, it wasn't flat out verbal, but what she was saying to me was a call for violence and a call for riot. And I knew that the riot was going to break out. I think it was either that Friday or Saturday night in last 2020 May. Maybe it was March. I think it was May. But
May, yeah.
And sure enough, my inclinations that she was calling for riot and the riot was going to happen, riot happened right on cue. And then I started following that, trying to see what was going on. And so that's how I first came in contact to it and filming it. But this Southern California stuff, I've seen it growing a little bit. It's obviously not as crazy as some cities in the U.S., like Seattle, Portland, New York City, Minneapolis. But I guess I just had an affinity. So anybody that watches my platform, or if you watch the rest of the stream, I don't know how far your clips go, will know that one reason that annoys me about the mind hive of the left, and I'm not comparing it to the right not having a mind hive, but the specific things they do in their mind hive, is they have a hard time seeing somebody that doesn't fit their box of perception. So I'm a grown man. I'm biologically male. I obviously sound like a man. If you saw me, I'm got a masculine build, um, but I dealt with gender dysphoria since I was a little boy. I think it had to do with dysfunctional childhood and just misdevelopment of certain psychological aspects. But I went through many years trying to understand that. I even thought that I was transgender, and I started questioning transitioning and that sort of thing. But ultimately, I found that that world didn't seem healthy to me. I also found that like a lot of people were pushing me to do things that I didn't think had anything to do with me personally. Like a lot of people in the LGBT world in that community kept insisting that I was gay. I'm straight. I'm attracted to women, but they constantly put it down my throat that I was a homosexual and that I hadn't accepted it yet. So I had a lot of them trying to put me in a box that I didn't fit in. And so one thing that when I was struggling to understand what I was going through and seeing all the stuff going through in society, I was just so in awe how people can not accept the fact that they're dealing with something in a minority, as a minority, and demand their comfort over the comforts of others. I never would think to just go into a woman's changing area as a 6'2" man. My first thoughts would like that would make women so uncomfortable, and I value that. And I just so when I see this stuff in WiSpa, I just don't understand why they're not understanding that other people are going to be uncomfortable. And it's not because they're bigots. It's just there's certain things that make people uncomfortable and make people comfortable. And a lot of women like to be in female only spaces when they're nude or dressing or using the restroom.
You know, I don't even know that people really understood what WiSpa was. The guy, you know, in the black block that talked to you, he got it. He explained it how a Korean spa works accurately. But there's probably a lot of people in that crowd who didn't know and who just got the headlines. And if you look at the press right now, transphobia is everywhere. Like if you look at Vice or Newsweek or whoever's written up the WiSpa, transphobia is everywhere. Now, the one thing that I can attest to, and I saw a clip of one of the organizers, the black woman who is the organizer of the right wing, the religious right, whatever you want to call it, that group that met in MacArthur Park. They prayed before they marched, and they also, she said, she addressed messaging. She said, I don't want to hear, let's not say anything about trans. Remember, it's about protecting children. And the press loves to take that and just run with it because they go, ooh, save the children, QAnon. This has to be, you know, they take the most fantastical iteration and they put that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that crowd were all, you know, QAnon. It doesn't mean that, you know, they say that there were two people with Proud Boys associations. It doesn't mean the whole crowd was Proud Boys. There could be, you could use the term Proud Boys adjacent. Certainly there were tough guys there. That was a tough crowd. You know, you and I both were on one side and then we walked to the other. And then what we see is because you are in a kind of a form of block, something happens to you. You get mistaken for Antifa. And I'm sure this isn't the first time that it's happened. But let's take a look. At this point, the clash has already happened. The police have moved in on the corner of Coronado and Wilshire. They've succeeded at keeping the two groups separated. The right wing is to the right, to the east, and then to the left is the left wing is to the west, and they're across this intersection of Coronado and Wilshire. And the police have just rushed in and blocked off the two groups. And then the left group starts clashing with the police. Some munitions are deployed at close range, no less. The left is also throwing fireworks and smoke bombs at the police. You see in a video clip, one person definitively tries to break the police line from the right, and he's pushed back. But there is more of a push, certainly, from the left. I see you then right after that, and we go around actually together, and then we cover some of the right wing. We see, I believe, a reporter from The Guardian is chased down by the right wing. I don't think I have I might have that clip pulled up. We'll go in chronological order. Why not? And I'll just play that clip right now. I think this is it. On the left there. This is your video, actually. So that guy just got clubbed behind the legs for chasing that reporter.
He was complying. He was complying.
Or my perception was I just saw the clash with him and the cops, so I just saw them telling him to leave, and he was leaving, and they started hitting him. I didn't see him chasing.
Yeah. And you note that he was complying, and it did seem that it did seem to come out of nowhere. I mean, it was definitely a use of force. We saw the same use of force by the police, no nonsense use of force against the Antifa group, just about 20 minutes earlier during the clash. They're zip tying him and so forth. I think this is the one arrest of a right winger, this fellow here in the motorcycle helmet, and maybe I can let's see.
Barely saw it, but the person it's at the right there, that person right there on the left of the screen now, that it turns out to be the guy that maces me later.
Let's see. Do you plan? Let's see if we see him. Oh, do you mean that helmet there?
Yep, to the left with the white football shoulder pads and white.
Right, and he maced another. Oh yeah, you can see the white shoulder pads there in the corner. Yeah, there's the white shoulder pads in the corner. That guy was trigger happy with that mace, and you were saying it didn't even feel like a mace.
No, it was one of the worst painful things I've ever been through. I've been bear maced before, and this was excruciatingly worse.
It was worse than bear mace. And a young girl, a poor girl in her it seems like she was in her early 20s, someone who I knew to be a two sides journalist like you and me that goes back and forth and tries to get the whole story. This young lady, not this one, but a young lady in a sort of a flannel gingham red petite girl, she gets maced by the same guy, and it's not clear why the heck he would do that. I mean, she's a reporter. That is a right wing. That's that guy I've seen around like different media people and activist commentators. I'll show you here. I think you had a picture of the Guardian. The woman from The Guardian is right here. She's running across the screen. She's trying to get out. She's there in the lower left with a hat. She was trying to get out, and the police wouldn't let her out. So she couldn't get beyond the police line. That crowd to the right is after her. I believe this is the woman from The Guardian. And they identify her as left. And I never wear a mask on this side of the... because you get questioned. She's wearing a mask. You could see that's usually a tough one to kind of, you get away with it somehow. But again, that's how they confuse him. You see the Spartan guy. There's your football jersey guy with a mace. And then boom, this is where he gets taken out right behind the legs there and falls to the ground. But he was part of, that crowd aggressing. Go ahead.
That young woman is in the frame of my camera.
What's that?
Just after this arrest, you'll see this young woman in the frame of my camera in the center.
Oh, that's her right there with the backpack. That's the Guardian reporter.
This is the second woman. So keep going a little further until I get to the right.
Oh, you mean the woman that you talked to after, or that's talking after?
Yes.
Yeah, what happens after?
So you see here, as I pan to the right, this crowd starts coming after her and telling her or calling her Antifa. This guy in the suit right there is saying that she's Antifa, and everybody's asking her why. And there's a group of grown men surrounding her. She looks very scared, and she's telling them she's not Antifa. And there's a group of grown men gathering around her, and I tell them to leave her alone. It doesn't matter who she is. They're worried that she was filming as Antifa. And my take is that there's about a dozen cameras right there in that little circle. It doesn't matter who she is. Everything's being filmed. And the right is starting to do this more and more, just like Antifa tries to control who can screen or film and can't. yeah, that's so this little clip there is me just kind of going at them like, why are these grown men surrounding this petite woman? And
Right.
so
And
at that football player that was next to me is because I think he was watching me defend her, and I think that
uh
maced
yeah,
me when
because
he
he's
crossed.
right there, right next to you.
Yep.
Now this guy is a little high strung. This is a guy who in the Blazer who got in a fight on July 3rd. He's been in a tit for tat with Antifa SoCal. He's destroyed a BLM vigil before. There's video of this. He's one of the people who SoCal Antifa doxed. He's a conservative activist that was doxed. They did a banner drop on a theater where they printed he and his girlfriend's address and names and stuff like that. So there's a long history with that individual. That's all I can say about that. Not that it makes anything right, because I think there were videos of him doing the same to a Beverly Hills press reporter as well. So yeah, the question is, do you eventually become that which you are opposed to? Essentially what these people end up doing is if they try to mimic the same security culture, they start behaving in the same way Antifa does. And we are seeing that more and more. I mean, we certainly saw it on January 6th. You see that a lot more now as far as these rash actions. I mean, I'm not sure if I explained this, but on July 3rd, after Jairo gets beaten up, he has a mate who comes in. I call it Patriot Block or Patriot Black Block. It's all black block, but with usually maybe an American flag or some insignia to kind of tip off that they're Patriot aligned. In his case, he was in total black block, but then he had a hat that said Patriot. So this guy comes out of nowhere. The second thing he does is he hits an Antifa-aligned press guy with, one of the typical press helmets on the head with a pipe. And he comes out of nowhere and does this right next to me on July 3rd. But before that, he had clubbed another person. That person turned out to be James Klug of Newsmax. So the first thing this guy does from the right wing is he clubs a Newsmax reporter. That's how it begun on July 3rd. I've been very critical of SoCal Antifa. They were unilaterally jumping conservatives, but the conservatives were no better, because the first thing that happens is he comes and clubs a Newsmax reporter. By the end, another guy in full block pulls a Bowie knife, cuts a Patriot woman in the arm. Is the first thing that he does. Another right winger in right wing Patriot block, and then he cuts a leftist on his leg, twice in the calf and once in the thigh. A guy named Alejandro that I spoke to he was the one who was walking around on a single crutch, which the police wanted to confiscate at one point because they were like, that crutch could be a weapon. But ultimately, we're seeing a lot of friendly fire here, a lot of attacks on journalists. I know the live streamer WYSIWYG was attacked also on July 3rd by SoCal Antifa Black Bloc. So a lot of friendly fire attacks and a lot of attacks like this one on you. This is a little bit later.
I'm villain report. Ask preacher.
All right, I rewind it. He says, "Get out of here, bro."
No, I'm not. I'm villain report. Ask preacher. I'm villain report. There's several people here who will vouch for me.
There's several people that put the word out. They're screaming to attack me.
What's that?
I said there were several people, like she's whispering into this guy's ear, telling them that who I am, and that that group of people had been alerted that I would be there filming to make sure that people didn't mistake me. And sure enough, but as far as I know, nobody addressed that guy for doing that. And then he did it again to that younger woman later. And I heard that he maced several people that day. But
with what you said, did not feel like mace. You said
it was excruciating. Like I ended up walking across the street and getting blinded, and I found myself alone on an LA street, not knowing where I was. I made it to a food cart, and I was able to buy some water, and I just started dumping it in my face. I wasn't in my wherewithal, so that's slowly drizzled the mace down my face, onto my neck, my chest and belly, my arms, and it took me about 45 minutes to probably get to my hotel room and to shower. It took about an hour of in a half a bottle of body wash, just continuously scrubbing before the pain started subsiding. I almost called 911 in the shower because it was just burning so bad. I was afraid that there was like maybe a more serious caustic burn happening. But I've been maced before, and there was one point when we were driving to my hotel room, and it was just it was burning so bad. All the affected area it literally felt like it was on fire. And I've been bear maced before, and it wasn't like that. But in the point in the car on the way to the hotel room, I literally almost started screaming out in pain. It was so excruciatingly painful, and I think I have a pretty high pain tolerance. I'm not a person that crumples.
And that poor girl too, because the girl was this petite little girl that I don't mean to say girl, but she was a young lady that was rather petite. And I had seen her on July 3rd because when Antifa was jumping people and pushing them out and sort of mob shaming them as go home transphobe and all of that nonsense, they went after this Hispanic couple that showed up. And they had a sign that I think was a little unfair. We've talked about use of the word pedophilia, and I think their sign said "Stop Pedophilia" or something. And I even had asked that couple afterwards. I said, "Isn't that a little? Aren't you taking the rhetoric to a whole other level? It doesn't be. If you just keep the conversation about safe spaces for women and children and having it like, a level-headed conversation about that, wouldn't that be better?" And I was asking these questions. Well, right next to me was that young girl. She was the only one who was brave enough to leave the mob. There was a dozen Antifa reporters. They all went with the mob to the next person. I went to talk to the couple that had gotten attacked and say, "Hey, what are you about? And they're like, "We support trans rights. We just think that for women and children to be safe, you need to maintain separate spaces." And they're like, "We're really open-minded people. We just, there's so much hate that was directed at us just now." And the woman was in tears. And then the young girl was there next to me, and she was asking questions too. Well, that young lady is the one who gets maced about 5 minutes after you do. And you said nobody checked him, but and I hate doing this. I'm supposed to be this fly on the wall guy, but I actually I saw nobody was checking him, and so I was like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" That's Villain Report. And I know who you are, I know your work, and I know you're actually more conservative leaning. Obviously, you and I have had debates before. We've talked. And so I tried to check him, it went through my head. I'm like, what am I doing? Because I'm a liberal, I'm a lefty. I went up to him and I said, "Dude, what are you doing?" And I'm like, he's in from Portland. And the guy was like, "Portland," and I'm like, "Yeah, but he's he's conservative, I couldn't believe it that you just got maced out of nowhere. And I couldn't believe it watching the video of the young lady, because she's just standing there asking questions like a reporter, and then you just see this orange plume just nailed her.
If you watch the videos, I've only seen 2 videos of him macing people, me and the young woman, but I've heard from several people that he was macing people regularly that day, and he's got it kind of attached to his waist, and he just puts it and starts to spray, and then he aims it. And to me, when I watched the videos, he had to have practiced that before he went there. Like, he was practicing like hiding his mace can and spraying people from the hip like that, because he's pretty good at it. And
it's a fucking chicken shit move too. I mean, I can't think of anything
very
more. Yeah, absolutely cowardly. Absolutely cowardly. So I did have some words with him, and then I kind of checked myself. I was like, "Oh, what am I doing in this? What am I doing in this story? This isn't my." But he didn't even listen, because obviously 5 minutes later he was macing somebody else. But I think a comment when I was talking with Brett Weinstein about the Capitol was, he said, "This crowd is very bad at policing itself in the same way, in some way." I mean, some ways I've seen them, quote unquote peace police. That Antifa aligned influencer Chad Loader had posted a video of the guys on the right that were at the front of the police line when the clash was happening, when you had Antifa on one side and you had the right on one side. Two of the guys that were fully blocked in Patriot Block, who one of is said to have Proud Boys associations, whatever, as they were pushing up, trying to get aggressive. I think it's that guy Will, the black guy with the dreads, who's I think his name's Will. He's a well-known MAGA kind of, patriot aligned YouTuber or something. I've actually spoken to him. I saw him first in Tulsa. Big story I told everybody when I went to the first Trump rally in Tulsa was I saw this black guy with dreads, and he was arguing with this young kid in a white polo shirt, and the white kid in the white polo shirt was arguing for BLM, and then the guy with the dreads was arguing for MAGA, and that's how I knew that guy Will, and had recognized him, seen him. He's just one of these guys that you see that is conservative line, but he was kind of peace policing and saying, hey, don't do that. So the right does have at times people who are saying, hey, let's not let this get out of control. But then when somebody does something ultra violent like that, it seems like everybody just sort of stands around and doesn't, really check them on it.
Yeah. It's it's pretty annoying, and it usually takes somebody from the outside or a centrist like myself to stand up and say, hey, how about you grown men stop intimidating this woman? How about you stop people?
And at the end of the day, what's she going to get? She's going to get footage of you being rowdy. And if you're dressed up head to toe in black anyway, what do you care? You know what I mean? I don't know. The security culture, it's ugly on the left, and then you see it spreading to the right, and it's just as ugly. So
you asked earlier why I block up and keep my identity. Well, before I started filming the riots, I had just created an anonymous Twitter account that Twitter has since taken. But I just wanted to be able to address and have discussions about heavy topics without having the backlash of that. I wanted to freely be able to, at the time when I created that account, I hadn't spoken out publicly about my personal life or anything like that, and I wanted to be able to discuss a lot of things. So, and I created the villain account because I have some extreme views and dissident views, and I just kind of went with it. Then I started using that when I started filming the moniker villain report, and it's not that at this point I've told people so much about my story. I don't really care what people personally think about me. Just doxing is a big cultural thing right now, and I don't want the trouble of that if I don't have to get it. If someday that happens, I'll have to deal with it. But I managed to not have that happen at this point, so I don't want unnecessary trouble. And the mask is a lot of work to keep the anonymous going up, but I just simply don't want to deal with the doxing.
No, I understand, and it's brutal from that sort of cultural leftist. They get away with a lot. I mean, I've talked a little about the Sonoma County pig's head. There's a Sonoma County pig's head drop where they dropped a pig's head and splattered blood on the front of a house that they thought was a police officer that was testifying on the behalf of Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis as far as use of force, but it wasn't. The house had been sold a year ago to somebody else. So some woman wakes up, there's a bloody pig's head and animal blood. They used real blood and paid for it with I think a credit card, because they were able to trace the purchase to a butcher, and that's how they got this group of 5 that were going to call themselves Sonoma County Antifa. Then they decided to change, and they became Sonoma County Radical Action, and they were doing this leftist thing, and they got the pig's head was on the wrong door, and what's interesting is there was a Trump supporter who then infiltrated the group and then passed on the recordings to, I believe, ABC Bay Area, local news channel. Well, the reporter, the local news reporter, and the Trump supporter get attacked by the LA scene Antifa press. And they go out, all these guys whose names I know, and I won't say them right now because I believe that they do that to other people and I know who they are, but I still am not going to do it to them because it's not right. It's just that's why I usually don't use last names unless it's somebody who's very out there. Like Chad Loader is out there. He's on record. You could put him into YouTube, and there's a video of him talking about being Antifa, and he talks about being, his views with anarchism and so forth. Daryl Lamont Jenkins is on the East Coast. He's someone who's, when I first interviewed him, he said, I am Antifa. So there are some people whose names who are just out there that you can use. I wouldn't have any problem. That's why, I use my full name as well. So I don't have an issue with that. But if people want privacy, I think we need to get to a place as a society where we respect people's privacy and private views, even if they don't agree with yours.
It's so that just 30 years ago, everybody's name and address was printed in a book in every house called the phone book.
Yeah.
Everybody's.
You could just go down it, and you wanted to talk to somebody, and it was no problem. You looked them up in the phone book.
All of them are in their house. I want to, before we go off on a tangent, can you imagine how terrifying it must have been for that woman to come out and have a pig's head and blood all over her front of her house?
It's the one situation, because I don't like to use the word terror lightly. People use that as sort of this catch-all sort of for this group is bad, terror this, terror that. Well, that is terrifying for sure. To walk up, wake up in the morning. I mean, hopefully somebody saw it and called her first, and she wasn't just going out to get the morning paper, the Sonoma Times, and as the pot of coffee is brewing, and she opens the door and there's a bloody frickin' pig's head and blood dripping off of her door knocker. It is terrifying. And the people who did it thought they got away with it for a while. One of them was of the accused is a wine influencer on Instagram who had like sponsors and stuff. Another was an activist. Two were younger in their 20s. Most of them were women in their 30s, but the 5 of them have been charged, I believe, with felony vandalism. And it's going to be interesting to see how that story evolves. Now, the Trump supporter who infiltrated and turned over the recordings has been fired from his job as a school teacher, and he was taken off of his education seat in like at a city council or whatever, and he was persecuted. So this is when these internet mobs have power. They accuse somebody of being a Nazi. They say it enough times that if you're a school board, you're like, oh my God, Chad Loader says he's a Nazi. He must be a Nazi. But what they don't know is that Chad Loader is Antifa, and that's what he does, And so you can't really base your stories or your employment decisions on what Antifa activists are doing, because their motto and their credo is to deplatform, don't give people a space to organize, and essentially shut it down. And by shut it down, that means shutting down your job, your career, whatever, for having an opinion that's different from theirs. So I completely understand, given the cultural, it's easier for me because I'm a lefty, I just say, hey, I've never voted for a conservative candidate. I'm just, so that shouldn't be right. We should be both having an open dialogue and being able to show our faces, but we can't. I've never seen your face. I consider you even, a friend, in the sense that the people that have done what we have for the last year, who've been true independents and have been attacked by both sides, there's a kind of, camaraderie in the sense that we know who each other are and we respect each other because we know what we have to deal with, which is we have to get attacked by, telling the truth on both sides means you have both sides hating you in some ways. But I'm just going to say and reiterate that we should not be living in a society when one of us feels comfortable showing their face and then the other one is at risk of losing his job if the mob comes after him in the cultural block of Portland, Seattle, or whatever the Pacific Northwest is right now. But go on.
Yeah, or you losing your security at your home, or people get um, have their banking institutions plagued by activists until there have been many people who lost their different banking accounts and on different platforms.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's crazy. I hope things change. I don't like wearing the mask. It's kind of a novelty for my social media platform brand, but it's a pain in the butt.
Gets old. Gets
So
hot. Gets
just
hot in there.
Antifa's, yeah, Antifa's the first that was doing this. So after Antifa started targeting me, and I got jumped once, and I got run out. They started identifying me and harassing me when I would be at events. I started filming a few right-wing events. I remember the first right-wing event I filmed was it was actually an Antifa event too. There was in Eugene, Oregon. There's this church that has this historic giant cross on their property, and Antifa, or people claiming, there was a story that Antifa was going to come down in buses and they were going to knock the cross down. And whether you believe that story was a fabrication to create a situation or real, that's another time. But so I go down there and I'm going to go film this crowd at the church, because they were all gathering to protect their church and protect the cross. There was like 3%ers there, and motorcycle gangs there, and militiamen, and church members and Trump supporters. And I remember walking up to the event. I had a mask on, and I had an American flag bandana on and like a beanie. And looking back at the footage later, I kind of looked like this is weird to see, but that day I hadn't looked in the mirror, and I did look a lot crazier than this. But I walked up, and I'm on my live stream, and I'm saying on my live stream, like, all right, I'm so excited to go film a right-wing event where I know I'm not going to get jumped. And the minute I got on there, like, I have people surrounding me and threatening to rip my mask off and threatening to beat me up. And I was like, what's happening? I thought you guys are the good guys. And so over the months, not only have I seen that, but I've seen it growing on the right-wing side. So the right wing is getting more and more like Antifa, and attacking people randomly. Attacking people for just being on the wrong side, attacking cameras and journalists, and being quite nasty in a lot of ways. So, and it's growing. I see it more and more at the right wing events.
Yeah, and it never was good, and it never will be, in my opinion, as far as when it comes to this kind of if you're going to this kind of tribalistic persecution where you're seeking out the person to persecute and trying to turn the crowd. Now, I don't know if you were right next to me, but a woman, a leftist activist woman who was Antifa aligned, saw me, and she yells at me, "You're a chud. You're a chud." And I kind of throw my hands up and I say, "Hey, I'm part of this community. I've been a part of this community since 2003. I've lived in Los Angeles since the 90s. I'm not here, I'm not here to do anything except, be here and watch." And she just kept yelling at me. She's like, and I think she wasn't successful because the crowd had other stuff going on. You had the actual, you had the LAPD first of all, and then you had the actual group that they had been anticipating on the other side of the street. So here's little old me when it didn't matter much. But I think I said earlier, if that had been July the 3rd, where they were roving around trying to turn on somebody, I would have been in a stickier situation. It's hard to, I'm more in some ways wary of the leftists than I am the rightists, because the leftists on the right, see, as long as I take my mask off and I'm just sort of showing it, and I even take my mask off when there's a scrum between the police. I've done that in Portland several times where the police were coming into that park and clearing everyone out. And I just pulled my mask down and I let the police see my face so that they knew that we could make eye contact they knew I was, I was compliant. I saw you there with your hands up as well. I mean, as chaotic as this is, you just don't want to get caught on the wrong end of a stick. And it was like that for me at the Capitol. I was trying to get down the steps. This is in the 5 p.m. hour of the Capitol. And there were still people, and they were like older, old ladies that were still trying to go up against Virginia State Police was called in to to clear out the last of the people that were up on the terrace. And I have my hands up, we're all crunched and there's a banister there and it's a long drop below and that banister's not very high. And I'm just saying, yes. Yes, I'm just saying yes over and over and just hoping that gets through to people to just, you guys, whatever you came here to do, you obviously did it, just get, let's be safe, let's be smart, and just, yes, let's comply. And there's so many situations that are so dangerous and people just get hopped up on the adrenaline and they want to ride that, to nowhere, essentially. And it's just that, it's a numbers game that sooner or later, something's going to go bad the way that people are pushing the envelope.
Yeah, I've been thinking that for a year. There's an event coming up in Portland, Oregon. Every summer they've had a big clash between the two sides. And they call it the Battle of Portland. The last summer I was pretty worried about it, and there was big worry that something really bad was going to happen. And it was an outlandish day. The worst of it were people macing each other really badly on both sides. And Antifa ended up throwing chunks of concrete. I don't think they actually were able to aim at anything, but they were throwing them. But so that's going to come up in August. And whenever something big like that happens, there's this hair on the back of your neck. Just hope nothing atrocious happens.
The biggest concern for me was as I was chasing all these sort of chaos situations that, because you have to think that some of these people get kind of addicted to it. They get addicted to going out there and being, feeling that adrenaline or that power of the mob. And the last thing that I wanted was to be on this sort of roller coaster where I was like, oh, well, I have to go to this one. I have to go to this one. And there's times that you step back. You kind of step back, especially after January. What were those moments like to kind of pull back and think to yourself, this is getting real. This is getting more close than I wanted it to.
I've seen several people die this last year. Several of them firsthand, actually hands-on, and trying to help them and not being able to help them, and then all the chaos and the division keep growing, and then there's so much uncertainty and confusion around many things, around the most politically unstable election that I think I've ever seen in my lifetime. COVID and all the controversy surrounding COVID. Many people are very depressed and not keeping their mental health up, or it's affecting them mentally. So there's a lot of chaos going on, and for me too. And all that was just building up in me, and I was like, I need to be around normal, calm things for a while, and not keep filling myself with all the anger and the hatred and the division that I see all the time filming this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it can get to you, after a while, and for a while you start to think, well, maybe we're gonna, come up for air, but then these controversies. And I mean, the WiSpa controversy was a non-controversy. It was manufactured consent to fight in some ways, because it should have been a much simpler conversation about acknowledging, one side's concern or complaint and desire to have safe spaces for women and children, and also to acknowledge trans people and their right their rights and obviously their rights to live their lives free from any sort of persecution or societal condemnation. And so we could have had some like real conversations, and it was cool to see you engaging in those conversations. But there's the people who don't want to talk, and then sometimes when you get them alone, people are willing to sort of talk. And you, what I realized in your conversation with the Black Bloc fellow that we're calling Black Bloc Chad is that he had a caricature understanding of the right wing, a understanding which I shared to a certain respect under Trump, until I actually went to talk to the people myself. And then I had a more of a better understanding of what their concerns were, what their, why they were attracted to the camaraderie, or I would even say the cultism of Trumpism. But when I got to Tulsa, when I got to that rally, I was determined to find white supremacists. And I combed that crowd for any kind of insignias or Charlottesville-like, symbols that would have indicated, those ethno-nationalist groups like American Vanguard or whatever they were back then. And I think, he used the word alt-right. And the alt-right, I hadn't even really heard, that was such a 2017, 2018 idea to me, that he was still stuck on this idea that these people who were showing up were alt-right, was a very different, I thought he was fighting a very different enemy that was caricatured in his mind based on 2017, 2018. Because if you take what that was, the Richard Spencer sort of, those groups that were rising with media help too from the left, that it was media eye candy, or what do you call it, like porn candy or whatever. Like they just loved putting stuff about, these kind of ethno-nationalist type groups and stuff, and painting the right with that broad brush. So I felt that the way that he was talking about the right, it was like, well, have you just watched a lot of documentaries on 2017, 2018? Is that where you're getting this from?
Yeah.
Did you watch all of Frontline's catalog from 2017? Because I did, and I thought those things. And then I saw that, people were changing and groups were changing. I saw more diversity in Trump supporters than I ever imagined. Lots of Latinos, lots of, Black people who support Trump. There's, so the picture, the caricature in my mind wasn't matching with the people I was talking to. And then when I went to Tulsa and I actually talked to Trump supporters, I had a much different understand. They weren't matching the caricature that was in my mind that had been fed to me by media. And that was an important realization. I had combed that crowd and I found one guy who had an 88 tattoo on his calf, 88, signifying Hitler. So, and I thought to myself, well, that one guy, did he get it in prison? Was he part of this? Or is he, maybe he is a neo-Nazi. But if I found one guy in a crowd of thousands, that doesn't make the whole rally, neo-Nazis. And I just came to and I encountered the Proud Boys for the first time. And I was like, well, these are the neo-Nazis. And I followed them. And then something in Tulsa happened as Black Lives Matter and the Proud Boys and were like clashing and yelling at each other and stuff. Some Rasta dude pulled out a boombox and he was playing Bob Marley, Is This Love? And people started jamming to it. And a couple of the Proud Boys lit up doobies, and then they smoked it. They smoked out, with the Black Lives Matter dude. And I was like, wait a second, these are supposed to be Nazis? This is just like, and then I realized I had to do a lot more frickin' research. You can't just read Vice News and assume what you're being force-fed from the activists is actual truth, because people are people in the end, and you realize that they're not fitting this cookie cutter of being the caricatures, the adversaries that we think they are because of all this other crap that we've read.
I agree.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Do you know the history? Is Vice News the same organization of the older Vice magazine?
I don't know. I didn't know there was an older Vice magazine.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
is that what it was? Yeah.
now, if
Maybe
it's
I.
true that same thing, it will be very ironic because Gavin McInnes, who started the Proud Boys, also started Vice magazine. I
And
think so.
Vice News. Yeah, so they are connected. Yes. So I do
The
know this.
news organization that's like constantly going on and on about these evil Nazi Proud Boys was started by the founder of the Proud Boys.
Yeah, and so I guess he was bought out, and maybe there was ideological friction and stuff. There's another interesting thing in my research of Gavin McInnes and the Proud Boys that I've uncovered that I found very interesting. And this was an anarchist from the Upper Midwest who tipped me off on this. Said that actually McInnes used to be part of the anarcho punk scene, and if you Google him and like anarcho punk bands, you see like pictures of him as like teenagers on the mic for some kind of band, and he has like a crossed out swastika on his chest, like, no Nazis or whatever. And he was part of that scene in Canada that was in the punk scene. And this is where this used to be a really fringe subcultural thing where the anarcho punks, the anti-racist skinheads, as it were, in the late 80s, would battle it out in the club scene with the neo-Nazi punks and neo-Nazi skinheads. And so it was all part of skinhead culture. And ACAB, ACAB, which you see, plastered everywhere in modern graffiti with Black Lives Matter and social justice, that came from the skinhead scene, that acronym did. And interestingly enough, Gavin McInnes was a part of that and then kind of rebelled against it and created his own Antifa, I guess, type security, gang, as it were. I think he announced it. I think it got big because he announced it as a gang when he was a guest on Joe Rogan's podcast. I think that had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But so it's interesting because and I saw him as more of a shock jock type, like I'm just going to say any word I want to kind of. He was part of that. I used to produce content for comedians in New York City in the 2000s, and that's the time Opie and Anthony was this show that was very controversial, and he was part of this culture, the shock jock culture of we'll say whatever the fuck we want. And at the same time, you had the millennials coming out of college saying, no, we don't want that. We're canceling that. And you had the advent of Twitter being used for this kind of shit. And so that gets us into the mess that we're in today. So from a sociological perspective, you look into the culture and you see, and there's all these sort of breadcrumbs to these different trails and of people's history, and they're not as cookie cutter as they seem. Like if someone's going to come up to you and say, well, Gavin McInnes, isn't he a Nazi or whatever? Then you say, well, he founded Vice, he was the king of hipsterism in Brooklyn. He founded Vice magazine, and he used to be a narco punk singer in a band in Canada. So it's more than just what you think of Mr. Millennial coming out of college, listening to a shock jock and just labeling him by this one catch-all word that you and your crew of social justice warlords have decided is going to sum him up. And there's a lot of labeling that goes on. I mean, this probably happens to you all the time. The amount of labeling on Twitter and social media. If this person is this person's a right-wing propagandist, or this person is a Capitol stormer. I got called a Capitol stormer, or this person, it's an absurd amount of just childish behavior in trying to shut people down and take them down, not just take them down a notch, just have them, tossed out of the public space.
Yeah. From your perspective and your history of doing this journalism for years and years, what do you see? Where do you see the split happening? Like, when did things start getting so politically divided in the U.S.?
I mean, a lot of it, I think, I mean, Trump is just something that the left cannot tolerate. They're just not. They don't have the constitution to deal with somebody. I always said you could run against Trump on just his childishness and his lack of filter that you need. When you have a president, you don't want a president that's just going to say every which thing and create chaos. You can run against that. You can run against. There were so many other things except white supremacy that were, that you could have criticized Trump for, but the activist scene wanted to go to the jugular for this sort of white supremacy thing, and it started ringing false, and people started leaving the fanaticism of the social justice left because it was so disingenuous in some ways, So when did I see things going bad? Well, I mean, this idea that people are getting deplatformed, that people are getting persecuted. It was kind of one of these things as a comfortable liberal that I could just turn away from because it didn't affect me. In other words, well, if conservatives were getting, accused of this or that for supporting Trump, well, fine. But then you started to see that post Charlottesville, that there was a kind of, and I feel this with the Capitol riot to some extent, where these tragic events, very tragic, get used and politicized to a point where the other side gets to act with impunity and, take people off of Facebook, take people, silence people. There's more to the story than that. And that's when once I stepped out, I got a chance this last year to see that I didn't have the full story. I had a story that was given to me by selected news sources which fit my ideological perspective. And it's not good to have a majoritarian power over the media or a moral majority. It has nothing to do with left or right. If you're on the left or the right, it's not good to have that impunity to try to impose and enforce some sort of code of conduct or a thought code that you're supposed to abide by. And that became very clear to me this year. I know it was around before that. I look back at my posts from a couple years ago, and I was on board with the punch a Nazi thing and all this, but not realizing that where that could go. So I think in the immediate years, the last 3 years have been especially bad. But this all, to me, comes from our news sources being overrun by a new generation of millennials and fresh out of college Gen Zers who come in and they come out of university with all of this theory, whether it's race, sex, gender, theory, and they don't know how to do journalism, which is just talk to people and get their stories and report the facts, because they're always trying to prop up an outrage echo chamber. And that's what we found out. These millennials found out when I was working in creative content in New York, is that the stuff that trended was outrage based. It was the kind of stuff that would provoke a reaction that you would then share, and then it would be reshared by people of like hive minds that wanted to all point their finger and say, isn't this awful? This Mumford and Sons banjo player's a fascist, or that story didn't even make sense. All he did was say that Andy No's book was brave, and all of a sudden the internet went off on him, and he gets kicked out of the band, or eventually leaves it on his own, I think. But this idea, the groupthink stuff, is pitched so high, and it's this generation that is complicit in it, and they've been hired by these media companies that aren't making any money off the internet through these click ads or whatever, all this nonsense. And so they're hiring very cheap labor, young people, to just reprocess stuff that they know will engage other people, So they all follow the same social justice Antifa aligned accounts. They reprocess their feeds into a news story. Boom, we got a lot of clicks. Congratulations.
Yeah, while you're saying all this, I'm thinking about the social media, and then I was thinking it was sometime in Obama's first term when I started noticing like real strong division. And I don't know if that was my age or I just never noticed it before, but I started seeing like people forming themselves into like two camps. And it wasn't that bad back then, but that's about the time when social media started really taking off. Like, obviously, there was social media before that. I think, what did Facebook come out in 2008 or something?
Oh yeah, I want
It
to
was before
say
that.
even no four, like even I think or yeah, maybe like 2000. I want to say like 5 or 4 in colleges. It was around that early, so
Yeah.
so then it really got going in the late 2000s.
So I think that these group of people that are getting out of college right now, the last several years, is the first generation that had constant um, social media that had been well developed by their preteens. So about like uh, so social media's been really big. I know it's been around for 15, 20 years, but it really got big around the social the 2010, because I remember I think YouTube came out in 2006, but it was like it wasn't that big for a while. But then it started getting snowball effect. So if it got really big in 2010 and started becoming a common household thing for social media, the people that are turned 20, 19, 21 recently had that as the norm since they were preteens.
Yeah, they've had it as a norm. That's a very good point. And so they're given their first job and they need to create engagement. Well, the way to create that engagement is to follow the kind of content that will provoke that. And so it's never the nuanced conversation that's going to be shared over and over again. It's going to be the extreme condemnation, the persecution, the outrage, the finger pointing that will. So also, these kinds of politicians, whether they're AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene, they are riding that same sort of wave of not being the even-handed articulate, kind of nuanced thinkers and thought provokers and willing to engage, but they're the exact opposite, taking a hard position and being somewhat of a provocateur that will put you in the headlines. So you have this whole attention seeking culture that has taken over everything, where people are doing it with impunity anonymously. And I mean, some people are being rewarded for it. It's incentivized for sure. And, there's incentive when you're in that crowd on the street to point out the guy that you think is the chud. People looking at me and they say, I don't know if that guy, what that guy's intentions are, with that camera. They're incentivized to point that person out in the crowd and say, go get him, because that means that the crowd next time around won't do it to them, that they've built up some sort of clout within that culture, within that crowd. Interestingly, the woman who was trying to turn the people against me, I talked to her about an hour and a half later, right before the kettle, because left wing all ended up getting kettled and upset about it because 39 of them got arrested and just one right winger. But they were being pushed west to a different street called Commonwealth. And I saw the lady again who tried to out me in the crowd and get people, and she called me by the wrong name, but I said, and I just said, hey, why did you do that? Why did you got to think about it. You put me in a dangerous situation because you don't know me, I don't know you, but you try to turn a crowd on me in a very intense situation like that, where the crowd is going up against the police, people are throwing fireworks, and you're trying to call me out. You don't know how that's going to end. Like, why would you do that? And we had a little bit of a conversation. And I think when you get people alone, much like when you talk to the guy in Black Blog, when you get people alone, you start to have a real one-on-one, and you see that that there's more there. But it's this tribalistic urge that people are latching into because it gives them value or clout or some sort of meaning to be part of that culture. That culture which condemns the other person, the culture of persecution.
Yeah. Yeah, I've
So,
experienced that a lot where it's worse the other way, where you see someone in the crowd and then you get to speak to them private. It's worse when you speak to someone private and it goes well, and then you see them in the crowd later and they're like back to group thinking. You're like, wait, we just like had a human conversation. And
yeah, yeah. No, it's. I've always been against. I think there's something strong in my constitution of who I am that has never. I've always been very individualistic. I've never really, at times not fit in. So I've never wanted to gratuitously fit in with some sort of, culture. And I was always very much in high school aware of the different cliques and their. Back then we called them cliques. The tendencies of groupthink and to think of other people as the other and the labeling, and it's a mess. I mean, we really have everything out there and weaponized in a way that we never have before. So we have to come towards some sort of agreement on, what to value and what to sort of respect as a mutual, point of contact, because otherwise we're going to be just pointing the finger at the other guy and trying to gin up this animus and this hate, because it really does come out as hate, and I've seen it from both sides, and I think people have to call out their own side too, and I think that's a power both of us have, in the sense that we are honest about our political leanings as center people and centrists who are willing to talk to everybody, but also lean a certain way that maybe the conversations with quote unquote our own side can start to gradually get people to voice some sense of moderation and understanding.
yeah, I would love to see a culture created to where we see events like a WiSpa controversy, and we see the numbers of people that show up to that to protest. But I'd like to actually see a peaceful protest where both sides respected each other and came. Maybe I'm having a
Utopian.
but I'd like to see that happen, and to where the people can come and talk and discuss and stop being crazy, and stop calling one side the Nazis and stop calling the other side the pedos. And
Right. And it really is, and it's I had tried on New Year's Eve. I hosted a conversation on this channel. It was an unusual story that came out of Utah, in which a Proud Boys member and a Black Lives Matter chapter leader became friends. And they realized that they actually agreed on a lot more. And on New Year's Eve, we just had this conversation. Of course, we all were taking a risk, because that means that people can point the finger at you and say, hey, that person talked to that person. But at the same time, we were all even a little bit protected, in the sense that we were all taking the risk, and we were going to okay about it. We knew we'd all get heat. The Proud Boy got kicked out of the Proud Boys for being on the YouTube on my live cast to talk about points of agreement with this woman who is, Black Lives Matter. And we realized there were like 8 of them getting big money out of politics. There was prison reform and police reform, there were, stopping child trafficking. You could take all of these buzz points and put them together, and they're actually points of common agreement that we have. And there's a lot more than we realize, because both parties, in a sense, have deserted the working people of this country. And at the end of the day, we all want the opportunity to create, a safe home for those that we care about. And there are, I'll have to look back at them and maybe bring them up again, but there were like 7 or 8 points of agreement that they realized, a Proud Boy and a Black Lives Matter leader, and that doesn't surprise me, because they're passionate enough to take to the streets, because they want to see whatever it is that we have now isn't addressing people's concerns and passions, and we have to figure out how to make the system work, better for everybody. And And I think that the more conversations that you can, but our culture isn't set up for that right now. Our culture is set up in this immediacy of, the social dilemma, as it were, to instead demonize and to label.
Yeah, I'm. I think I'm at the end of my
Yeah.
ability to continue on with a coherent conversation. But do you? I don't know how you do your podcast. Do you ever take questions from the chat or anything?
I do. If there are any questions that you looked at that you saw, it looks like they're talking to each other a lot. There seems to be a good amount of banter in the chat, which is always great. People are, you got some snide comments, you got this or that. But are there any questions specifically for Villain or for myself? I know we got some compliments right here. So the Mother of Robots says, Villain, Jay Lee, fantastic work here. If there's any questions, I appreciate the support. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Jay Lee Quinn. Villain Report on YouTube. I noticed you don't have a custom URL, but if you put in Villain Report on YouTube, that gets you to the page to subscribe to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My platform, Villain Report on YouTube, is my main place. So.
Okay. Yeah. Everybody subscribe to villainreport.youtube if you haven't yet. Somebody's asking, what is somebody asking about? How much have y'all shared? Well, this is an interesting question. I'll bring it up. How much have y'all shared with the FBI regarding 1.6? And this is a touchy subject, but I'll just briefly address it, and you can or cannot. It's up to you. But it's something that I told Villain Report privately that I might as well just tell everybody now. An interesting thing happened to me. The leftists, of all people, the supposed anti-fascist anarchists, the leftists, came after me back in April, and they posted a picture of me. The guy was a former UC Berkeley grad student in journalism who of 2018, who posts a picture of me and says Capitol Stormer, and he ats me to the FBI. And he ats me to the FBI over and over, or someone else added me, I think. I'm not sure if he did, but he comes up to me and says, so let me correct that. He comes up to me and says, well, did you talk to the FBI? Because I actually had to confront him to take down the post because it said I was a Capitol Stormer, according to him. And so I asked him to take it down in person. And he keeps asking me, did you talk to the FBI? Did you talk to the FBI and stuff? And then some other people started adding me to the FBI. Well, they had come to my doorstep, and so I did eventually speak with them. What's interesting is I see this violence as cyclical. I see it as both sides feeding the other. So when the question is, how much did you talk about 1.6? I talked about it all. That makes me nobody's friend, but I got approached, and I will very honestly say, I did share a little bit of my experience. Not all of it, but here's the thing: all of it's out there. If the FBI wants to look at our work, it's not hard. It's all out there on these live streams. There's 2 hours of us interacting with people. So in some ways, I think my opinion is that you and I are both immune to any sort of, suspicion because we've been transparent. The obstacle is you wear a mask, which I'm sure creates some questions, but for the most part, as far as who you are, if someone sits down and watches your feeds and just spends a day watching your feeds, they'll know who you are. I knew who you were, and I was comfortable to build up a rapport with you back in December because I knew, was it December or January? Well, I think we talked on the phone first in like November or December. But the point I'm trying to make is that I felt comfortable enough with your work because I knew what kind of person you were. I knew how you engaged with the material. I knew the kind of conversations you were willing to have, despite our views not aligning. And so in that respect, I'm not... When people ask me about the FBI and stuff, I'm open to the fact that I'm willing to talk because everything's out there already. My material's out there. It's well documented that I've been running around following this stuff since May of last year. So it's
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah, I agree too. I've chosen not to speak to the FBI unless I have to, just because everything's so crazy right now. Partly local law enforcement in different cities that I've seen selectively choosing how they're going to enforce the law on different people. That really unsettles me. Um, how, even though the federal building was being literally firebombed night after night after night in Portland for over 100 days, um, heard little of the FBI going after them very much at all. But then the right wing crowd goes to the Capitol, and no firebombing, nowhere near as crazy as what I saw in Portland at the riots. And they've spent thousands and thousands and thousands of man hours, and often just arrests, making obscure arrests, not just the extreme arrests. Like, I understand the people that were just beating the hell out of the cops, but yeah, it's
Obscure arrests are unsettling in the sense that, that makes you wonder if there's some sort of political pressure, and that's what's worrisome, is if there's political pressure to make arrests that are unnecessary. I mentioned I did a live cast here with Stephen Horn, a colleague, a journalist colleague who came on here. Showed his video footage that we discussed the Capitol very openly, and afterwards he got charged. And I've openly said to Stephen Horn that I think that that's wrong, especially because he says he volunteered his footage and was trying to be a good citizen, and he ended up getting charged, and I think that's wrong. So this if there are people who are being sort of swept up as in the whole sort of political pressure of it to make arrests, I think that they should have the right to speak out, and they should have the right to protest and have their voices heard if they feel that they're being politically persecuted. What you're seeing already is Antifa-aligned groups are planning to protest any kinds or counter protests, because that's all they ever do is show up 2 hours early before a right-wing protest. They really don't go, being an anti anything isn't great, because that means that you're not really doing anything for yourself. You're just going out to oppose somebody else. So, you know what?
of hate rather than out of love. It's not
Right.
going to work
Why
really
don't you
well.
be a pro something? That's kind of how I feel. Pro anything.
Here's something interesting I looked at. I was looking through one of my chats, the live chat of one of my videos I recently put out today, and there's a reference to something I had to look up, and it's in your chat right now too. This busybone person, I'd probably block him if it was my channel, but they keep using the word glowy.
What's
And
that?
someone was calling me a glowy. I had to Google it and read an article about it. And so as the far right is starting to grow, and after January 6th, the article was mentioning that there's more and more suspicion of each other within these groups, and a glowy is a person in the right, or that's able to go into the right, and it is assumed to be a federal agent.
Uh,
So Busybone is calling both of us federal agents.
okay. Got it. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of suspicion, of the government, and that the way that the FBI has handled some of these arrests, it seems. And I think that I think no entity should be free from scrutiny. And I mentioned the case of Stephen Horn being arrested, and I'm sure there's many others. I haven't been, because I am someone who really, has focused on, the left, on Antifa. I haven't kept up as much with, I did for a while, but the interesting statistic coming out of the Capitol is that only 1 in 10 of the 800 people who entered the Capitol belonged to any sort of group or club, whether it's the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, or any other sort of group. They only found one person who belonged to an ethno-nationalist gang, like an Aryan Brotherhood type, and they had one other ethno-nationalist that actually happened to be of the Latin kings. So so there were only 2 people that were of any kind of ethno gang of those 800. Of them, there's still no reports of anybody ever being armed with an actual gun. I didn't see any guns that day, and I keep telling people, just because armed insurrection trends on Twitter doesn't mean that it happened that way, because every single reporter I've talked to says they never saw guns. There were only 3 arrests in the Capitol vicinity for firearms, of people coming back to their cars, their vehicles, and having arms in those vehicles. Possibly one or 2, had them on their person. I don't know exactly, but there were only 3 within the Capitol vicinity. 3 others were a mile away from the Capitol. So,
person armed, and I've only seen one picture of a person that was armed that day, and that's the famous picture of the guy with the zip ties on his waist jumping over the balcony. He was the only that was pictured with the firearm. I saw no one in person with a firearm.
Was there a firearm on him? Like for sure? There was?
I could be wrong. Like, now you're making me question myself, but I was pretty sure.
I see it. Go look at it again. I'm not sure. That's because I've seen that. I scrutinized that picture too, and I'm thinking maybe it might not be. But the zip tie thing, he, I guess, is claiming he found them there, like they were abandoned or had been taken. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how some of these cases, but as I said, I haven't been too, in this culture on Twitter, the sedition hunters, as it were, they've never really liked me, because, I don't think it's journalists' jobs to get people arrested, quite frankly. I think it's our job to tell the story and shine a light and illuminate why things are happening in society and talk to people. So this whole sedition hunter culture on Twitter, I've never been a fan of, and I don't think they've really cared for me either, because I'm interested in the information. But if somebody, like the person who escorted me into the Capitol and asked me to film, my first impulse, if I ever saw him, would be to interview him again. That's what I'm interested. I'm interested in the conversation, the story. I don't really give a shit about who goes to jail or this and that. I don't want people who don't deserve it to go to jail, certainly.
Yeah, and for me, that goes to my anarchist philosophy, and I don't want to change the world through force. I'd like to change the world through dialogue. So yeah, if there is a criminal, I haven't taken the role of detective in this life or police officer. But what I'm interested in is talking to people and understanding them and seeing if we have a dialogue, and maybe hopefully getting them to think or ask them questions, and maybe influence them, if I'm lucky, to maybe not violently attack people.
That's ultimately the goal. That's the hope. All right, Villain Report. I kept you overtime. We clocked in at 2 hours. It's been, my guest has been Villain Report. You guys, thank you for showing up and being supportive. Villain Report, I hope to see you in another city at another time. I mean, I was happy, as I said, to see you in the crowd, because I was like, there's a familiar face. I've never seen it, but there's a familiar face.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on your podcast, man.
All right, until next time. Thanks all. Be sure to follow Villain Report on YouTube. I'm at J. Lee Quinn. Have a good night.